Right, so what do 5 Agile coaches get up to in lockdown? Well, to just look after our sanity and so on. This goes back to a guides retreat or online because of lockdown and so on. Nigel Baker, who I think may or may not be looking to attend tonight, posted a topic on the board of scaling and why we should have a scaling offering in the Scrum Alliance. So about 30 of us, I think, had a good talk. And very quickly, we were really agreeing about some of the problems, some of the approaches, and thinking that we needed an alternative approach. Got very excited about it. That group, then about 18 of us met about the following couple of weeks, fairly quickly resolved down to 5 of us. And 5 of us have kind of met pretty frequently, regularly sort of every Monday evening and so on. We've done some whole day sessions and other sessions, just trying to argue through, and we've had lots of arguments, great discussions, and just talk through some of the issues, some of our experiences, etc. Try and sort out terminology, language, and our different perspectives and different capabilities. We're a classic cross-functional team. So it's been a very rewarding exercise. We've had some great arguments about things. It's moved all of our thinking on, and we've been able to focus down some of our language. And some of the things that we've come up with are some kind of agreed terminology. Are we trying to create something entirely new? I'd say not. I think we're bringing together stuff, bringing ideas, maybe putting a little bit of construction and shaping and scaffolding around them, perhaps. But is there a lot new in here? Well, you can have a look and see what you think. So there's the team. We won't win any awards for our looks, maybe, apart from Matt, of course. Matt has joined us on the call here. So Matt may well help me answer some of the questions. Are you happy to do that, Matt? Maybe? Good.
Yes, okay.
Fantastic. He's been roped in. All right, so where do we start? We started with the premise that a lot of us are bumping into failed, scaled implementations, many of them safe. This session is not going to be a safe bashing session. It's not what we're here for. Okay, there's lots of ideas in safe that aren't on their own, bad ideas, etc. But there are a lot of failed attempts at putting in safe at scale. I watched a whole business unit, 5,000 people in a bank, get absolutely destroyed by a top-down implementation of SAFe. I was unfortunately involved as the Scrum trainer, trying to just teach Scrum in there within a context where it really was, eating up and chewing up Scrum. But also, we're pushing down roles, etc. Everybody was forced into a new role. There were lots of chains of commands on people passing stuff. It was just horrible. And all of us have lots of experiences like that. In many instances, we're as coaches and guides and consultants, we're going in and helping organizations unpick the ruins of various implementations. So that's where we started. All right, so we came up with elevator pitch fairly early on. Some of this was around, we've had discussions around what do we call scaling? Is scaling just where you've got more than one team who are all collectively trying to achieve some outcome to which they're mutually interdependent? Or is it about scaling across a whole organization? And we argued backwards and forwards. In the end, we found it resolved down to the same sets of problems. So really, I think we're talking about scaling per se. As soon as we've got multiple teams that need to or have some impact on each other, a lot of these things come into play. So we've got slightly less worried about whether we're talking about organizational scale or whether we're talking large program scale. All right, so the key bit of our approach is it's non-prescriptive. It isn't a framework, and it isn't trying to be a framework and never will be. And what it's doing is also recognizing that there's lots and lots of patterns and practices, etc., out there. There's so many books and frameworks and so on. We can steal bits from them, and it's about how we apply those. When do we apply them? Do we apply them? Are they actually suitable for the context we find ourselves in? And also not just the context will change over time. An organization today, or even a large program just starting up, in 6 months' time, it will require different processes and different approaches. So whatever we put in needs to be dynamic and evolve with it. Agile is all about inspecting and adapting. That's not just what we're building as a product, but our processes and how we work, how we collaborate. And when we scale, that just gets turned up to 11. Yeah. So any grit in the mechanisms is just going to cause way more problems than they do with a single team that can probably just work around them. Okay, so framework first challenges. I'm probably going to be preaching to the converted based on some of your stuff on the chat. So when we come along with a framework and push it in, what we very often do is, I call it additive rather than transformative. Yeah, so basically we come along, we take less, safe, whatever it happens to be, and we kind of just ram it in the top. People have new roles, etc. What actually changes underneath? Are there any structural changes? Yeah, are there any policy changes? Do we change the way procurement and HR works? Yeah, we very often don't. We just mash in this new process, hoping that the process is going to be the thing that delivers all the value for us and sorts out all our interdependencies and complexities in our organization. And so we find that that doesn't work. And of course, change done to people is also unlikely to succeed. All right, so let's build this slide up here. This slide basically splits out into two major reasons that frameworks have a problem. One is the applicability of the framework. The other is the way we adopt it, the way we actually transform from our current state to our future state. All right, so the idea of this is that the more comprehensive, the larger the pattern, the less it's going to be applicable to any given context. So the larger the thing, the more rules, practices, etc. it has in it, the less likely it will apply to a given context. All right, so if we have something very, very simple, then it's probably got quite a high applicability, and we can use it like a hammer, in lots of different places. If you've got a whole suite of stuff all together, then it becomes less and less, doesn't travel quite so well. It's more and more prescriptive. All right, so down the bottom here, we've got kind of principles and rules. So if we are less prescriptive, we're resolving back down to the key underlying principles. And we don't actually have the processes, roles, practices, policies, etc. We kind of have to make them up. At the other end of the spectrum, it's all rule driven. And we're following practices and process, etc. We've got lots of roles, lots of patterns that are being implemented. All right, so the problem with this, on the left here, we have what we call emergent practice. Because we don't have any rules to start with, we're going to have to build these rules for ourselves. If we've got something large, some large scale pattern in there, there's a great temptation for people to go, oh, that's what it says here. I've been trained on this, I do this, so we have this role, and we just follow the rules without actually thinking about underlying principles for it. All right, this is taken from IBL, so intent-based leadership. What we see where we don't have that many building blocks and patterns and so on, and best practice, people actually have to think for themselves. They have to take initiative. They have to experiment and learn and take risks and actually exhibit leadership. Where we have lots of rules, particularly where they're imposed, people are going to be passive. Well, what does it say? Well, I do this, I fill out this document and I pass it over to this person and I'm just a cog in the machine. And so we have a very passive thing. I'll just wait to be told what to do, and I'll just sit here. I can't take any risks and rules, or I don't want to break the rules. And so there's no experimentation and learning. So clearly on the left, we're very empowered. We get to create our own process and evolve our own processes. On the right, we're told exactly how things are going to be, top down, and it probably isn't even going to be suitable, but hey, I get paid. And this, I think, is part of the problem. If we are going to go from a principles-led point of view, we have to do thinking. We have to go, right, what's our problem? What are our possible solutions? And we have to think for ourselves. I think SAFE particularly has done a great job of marketing, and it hits the CEOs, CIOs, and they go, look, all does it all out of the box. We don't have to think, that's best practice. Let's just put that in. And I think that the thinking part is the challenge. If we don't have the easy answers, then we've got a problem. There's a box, it's got all the goodies in it, it's got all the easy answers, let's go that way. And I think this is why there are so many failed implementations of the large frameworks, because bosses, they buy into it, top down, and then we have a whole set of practices that just aren't suitable. All right, so the other side of this is the transformation. I've used this slide before when I was talking about best practices and why they're not best and why they generally aren't very suitable. But if we have a current state if we come along with a big framework, it's a big transactional change. We sheeped up everybody on training and so on, re-rolls, processes and so on, right? So you've got a program increment, right? You've got 7 teams, you've got to do PI planning for the next 6 sprints. It's a massive change to inflict on an organization. Any big change is massively risky. You're going to get all the kind of change antibodies firing off. Nobody wants to do it. We don't have good buy-in. And of course, it's a big change. And so it has a huge amount of risk. Is it actually going to work for us? Is it going to be suitable for the problem we have? Okay, so this is not an attempt to list all of the different scale models out there. I was thinking, well, I haven't got this model, and the slides just started looking ridiculous. So there's lots and lots of scale things out there. What this slide is about is basically categorizing the 3 effectively categories of scale models that we came out with. One's emergent. This is the bit where we're having to start with principles, start with our current context, and emerge our practices. The original Spotify model, if we're allowed to call it that, effectively emerged from Spotify, figuring out, we'll have our own terminology, we'll have these things called squads, etc. And they emerged and evolved their own model. And then in 2012, Heinrich did a talk on that and took a snapshot of the current state of play for that model. People have picked that up, of course, and now they implement the Spotify model, and that's not emergent. Okay, the Spotify model is, from 2012, was emerged for a music organization, isn't necessarily going to work at a bank. All right, so emergence is kind of where we're at. Then there's a bunch of scaled Scrum frameworks that effectively start with Scrum and add what they consider just enough in terms of patterns and practices and so on the top to make Scrum work at scale. But particularly less, their intent is to be as close to Scrum as possible. So they're Scrum-based, and then they add. Some of the others are effectively, and I've just called them Agile plus other. They're a conglomerate, and if you look at SAFe, it's a meta pattern. It effectively gets lots of different patterns into a big meta pattern, and this is what you do. And of course, they have 2. They have the essential SAFe and then big SAFe. Less, of course, has multiple versions as well of different scales. All right, so there's lots of stuff out here, and as I said, these things aren't evil in themselves. And there's lots. Effectively, SAFe just package a lot of good stuff. Some of it gets slightly mangled, but I won't go there. Things like fast and so on, really interesting stuff. Have a look at it. There's lots of interesting ideas and patterns in there. We can take those patterns out, but we want to be on the left here and use our brains, do some thinking, and this is what we're going to go through in terms of our approach. All right, so coming back to this, this slide, where and I've just loosely put the categories on here. Kanban effectively doesn't have any process, or very, very, very little. It's tiny, and then you emerge and build your own. Scrum, of course, does have some process, so it's a bit bigger. We've got roughly the scaled Scrum approaches like LESS and Nexus, etc. here, and then we've put SAFe and RAP and so on right down the end here because they've just got such a lot in them. Where we're targeting our ScaleAgility stuff is down here. It's far, far closer to the principles, and we're going to have to emerge and build our practices on top of it. All right, so a principle-first approach. I'm going to kind of summarize what we've got kind of in the box, if you will, as for ScaleAgility. So there's a clear set of principles in there, and we're currently, the current state of play of that is we've been working on these for a while. We've evolved the way we're writing them. We're currently doing a big clean up to get our language consistent, get everything neat, and we obviously work in multiple languages, and so some of our English is a little variable. So we're just doing a big process of cleaning that up. We aim to release this publicly in the summer. So summer hopefully is going to be a nice long Indian summer. But by the end of this summer UK, we're hoping to have that publicly available, and you can go in and have a look at the principles, use the principles, etc., and the sort of knowledge base that we've got in there. All right, so perspectives. We originally kind of called this concepts, but we've got these kind of perspectives. And so we've got principles which are pretty tight. and they'll have a, here's the principle, here's some explanation around the principle, quite short. In perspectives, we'll have stuff around, say, product. How do we shape and scale a product? How do we think about product ownership? How do we think about teams? What do leadership have to do? And so we've got a number of much more wordy, lots of diagrams, etc., just talking through some of the kind of theoretical stuff, concepts, and also some of our terminology. And I'll give you just a little snapshot of some of that in this session. We've got some tools in there as well. What part of it, and I'll show you this a little bit later, is a workshop approach to actually work with your people or your customers' people to actually understand their current context and then use the principles to work out where that context perhaps has opportunities for us to start evolving our practices and ways of working towards the principles. So using the principles as a lens. You can use all sorts of other tools. We're not trying to put something out there and go, you have to use these. Things like value stream mapping, massively powerful. I use that quite a lot, and brilliant tool. You could use value stream mapping instead of the little workshop technique I will show you. And then the patterns themselves. We have very, very few patterns in there at the moment. There probably are some examples and bits and pieces in there. What we found is some of our principles, when we re-looked at them, they were probably closer to patterns and advice about how to do something. So we're stripping those out. Effectively, the patterns you can draw down from all of the different patterns, practices, etc. that are out there. Less, fast, books like Team Topologies, massively great. Accelerate, Lean Enterprise, dynamic reteaming. From the leadership perspective, lots of intent-based leadership stuff, psychological safety, and then to change, things like lean change management, and you'll find, we'll look at this in a little bit, the change process itself and how you bring these ideas is at least as important as the ideas you bring in. And so right at the heart of our approach is an incremental evolutionary change process. Sorry about the telephone ringing, it will stop in a moment. All right, so perspectives, terminology, and concepts. So this perspectives bit, I'm just going to give you just a little bit or a flavour of some of this. So starting with where we are today, and we've got, this is Pierluigi's sense of humour and artistic prowess. We've got some company, Grey, that we want to improve. And we've got this kind of expression about an end-to-end organisation. So rather than lots of little bits and pieces, we can see everything end to end, and we're looking at this thing as a flow of value. And you will see that we use value stream as a central concept. All right, well, to get this and understand how it works, one of the places we need to start is with product. We find that a lot of organizations don't start with product. They start with technical capabilities, and then they work up from there, rather than the business services value that they're trying to create and work backwards from there. When we go into organizations, we very often find they have a very confused view of product. I'm working, or have been working in a place with 7 product owners, and the products all overlap. And then you've got a competitive relationship between the product owners and a confused product landscape. So straight away, we want to be able to get a hold of our product, have it much higher clarity, and try and look for this product to be an end-to-end strip of value. And when we're actually splitting down and trying to scale, can we split down around these end-to-end stripes, if you will, through the product definition? All right, so once you've got a good idea of your product, you can then have a much more sane, clean sort of model around your product ownership, where you don't have product owners competing and stepping on each other's toes. How many product owners do you even need? Can you do it with one? And so there's a whole aspect of trying to get clarity around product ownership. But if we have a product owner who can't see the customer and is actually building something which is actually internally consumed and then gets passed on to somebody else, gets passed on to something else, well, how does that product owner actually add value? What does their thing even do? All right, so underpinning a lot of this is our craftsmanship. And how do we actually build end to end? And you'll see that I've got some diagrams later on to illustrate that we quite often don't. And the craft itself is going to be the basis for helping us as teams actually collaborate, how we bring our different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together and make sure that it actually works together. And of course, this all then enables our end-to-end teams, and with the teams view, do the teams just look at little widgets, or can they actually see the value? And if we think about motivation, clarity and clarity of decisions, why they designed or build something in a particular way, they need to absolutely understand why it's there, what it's going to be, and the end-to-end value. And then underpinning all this, of course, we're going to need leadership to help us with the environment and make sure that we are taking our current environment and improving the thing. And we're talking about iterative sort of agile change. If we look at an organization, we'll find that most organizations have a lot of what we call accidental complexity. So we've got two types of complexity: the essential complexity of the problem we're trying to solve. And some of the problems we're trying to solve are horribly complex. But then along we come with our organization, and we find that we've got this procurement process which takes 6 months just to get a trial of a platform. Or we've got a budget process that stops us doing things, or a recruitment process that gets in the way of things. Or I've got teams that are getting in the way of each other, or they're building stuff and handing stuff on, they're building stuff they don't need. And so we've got a lot of accidental complexity in our organizations. Leadership's job is to fix the environment. It's to help us understand all the different bits that aren't working. We're going to get intel from our Scrum Masters and our teams and so on, but we need to make sure that this organization is a better and better platform for our teams to deliver value. And this is our mission. Okay, so just defining product. One of the things we find, I don't know if this resonates with anybody else, is that when you step outside of IT and software delivery, we find that the idea of product and product ownership doesn't travel so well. If you're working with a finance department or HR, and you go, well, what's your product? Well, we do financial things, we've got to submit accounts, we've got to do this, we've got expenses and so on. So we found that product as a word didn't always help us reach outside of IT. And if we're looking for an end-to-end IT, it's not just about the software parts of it. We have to have language that translates. And again, some senior leadership, it doesn't actually work that well to them. All right, so we define products as actual goods or services providing value to customers and businesses, and it generates an outcome manifesting in an observable impact. So that's our kind of true end-to-end view of product. And so a product, we say, is generated through a value stream. And we're finding the term value stream to be much more flexible for us. All right, so a value stream is looking at anything from the idea all the way through to the actual end customer. So this end-to-end stripe through it. And so there's a stream of activities that come together to help us create this value. And it could have all sorts of things in it, from a vision for what the thing should do, roadmaps, etc., all the way through to product increments and releases going out to the customer. So a value stream itself may be more complex. And we may find that actually some value streams, when we look at them, are made up of multiple value streams. A number of value streams come together to actually serve a wider overall thing. I found this in organizations, say, that are creating the software, the systems that go into TVs. So if you think about your TV's got a menu system there, it might be able to record and do all sorts of stuff. And so you have people who are building encoders that can encode video and audio streams and building up that capability. Then you've got people who are creating different interfaces for different TVs and the menu and the UI, the interaction, etc. We've got there quite a complex value stream. And so just thinking of it as a single product can be a little bit limiting and oversimplifying the problem. So, for example, VW, the MQB platform, got lots of common parts that get put together but can come out as different variants. If you think about things like engines and so on, some of them may share the same engine. Well, the engine itself, of course, could be a value stream in its own right. So we may have various engines, electric, diesel, petrol, whatever, different sizes, etc., being produced. Does the engine have value? Got a set of people who are designing and building the thing? Yeah, it does. Can it be sold separately as value? Yeah, it probably could. Out of spares, etc. That engine, of course, could though, be wrapped into a wider product, which is perhaps, you know, a car, might be a sports model, etc., that then gets shipped to the customer. So it's part of another value stream. So some of our value streams are more complex, and we call these composite value streams. So coming back to what ScaleAgility is, it's got a set of terminology in there, some descriptions that help us describe some of these problems that then provide a kind of a hook for us to then put our principles into. All right, so on to scaling principles. The green ones here are ones that we have been actively working on and have a chunk of principles. Are they complete? No. Will they ever be complete? I see that these will just continually evolve. And I think one of the things we'll probably see once this goes public, once we've got, I guess, our MVP out of the door, then lots of feedback, how the principles do and don't work, how we've articulated them, what bits are missing. We'll just expand and evolve those over time. So it's going to be going through agile change like anything else. So these green ones are the ones we've been working on. We will probably have one around people because we have been working on some of the perspectives for that. One of the things that I think we probably need to get to fairly quickly is the cross-team collaboration. So we've kind of got stuff that's structured around teams, and we want to have more of the dynamics and the sort of team intercommunication mechanisms and so on. All right, so the big principles that we've got in there, we found that when we were writing some of the principles, they weren't in a specific category. They were just cross-cutting big old principles. And so we've categorized those as general. Stuff specifically around teams. This is, as I said, more of the structure. Leadership principles for how leadership supports the organization and its change. Stuff around the product and how we structure product versus how we then arrange product ownership. All right, so if you look at some of the general principles, evolutionary change over revolutionary change, scale only when you need to, start small, scale success, organize around value streams, minimize unnecessary complexity, limit work in progress, management supports rather than drives the work, optimize the systems of work for the majority of cases rather than exceptions. We see a lot of organizations focus way too much energy on the minority of cases rather than actually building a system for the general flow, you know, the path of least resistance. And shared context improves decisions. And again, this comes back to this end-to-end view. Why am I doing this? I need to understand why I'm doing this. So just to give one example, if we just pick on start small and scale success, we've got a little media wiki at the moment. It's ugly, but it's kind of vaguely structured in the way we want it to. Come the summer, it might all be all glossy and lovely. Will we be able to compete with Safe's loveliness of its website and so on? Probably not. But hopefully it'll be workable and we'll have information that people can consume and use. So there's just an example of one of the principles, and you can see, you know, I picked one that would fit on the page, but most of them do. Some of them are a little bit longer, and we're just working on tightening those up a little bit. Okay, so a lot of the principles are kind of mutually supporting, but a lot of them are absolutely in tension. So if we have one from the product ownership stuff, which is where we need to limit the product owner mental workload. So we could see that a product owner, as we scale, we say, well, we only want one product owner because that keeps it all clean, holistic, which is lovely. When you've got about 12 teams, can one product owner actually scale across 12 teams? Their brain explodes. Yeah, the numbers of stakeholders, interactions with the team and so on, prioritization decisions, the backlog's just huge by now. Their mental workload just goes to a point where a single human being just can't cope with it. Yeah, we've got some patterns we could put in there. We can offload some to the teams and so on. They can help us refine. But at a certain stage, Les puts it around about 8 teams, the wheels fall off and the product owner can't cope. And then, of course, this is in contention with minimum viable product owners. So your point is, well, can I have one? No, I can't have one. Should we have 20? No, 20 is just going to be too many. Yeah, it's not the minimum viable. So you can see that these principles are in tension. And then we are going to try and find the right balance. So this is our trick. So just to give a kind of visual on how this might look. So we've got a little radar chart, got a number of the product owner principles around it. And then we can see, and so what I've done here is, just it's a relative scoring, 0 to 3 to 5. How do we think we are on this principle? Have we absolutely nailed it? 5. We haven't even made an attempt at this at 0. And then we could just relatively score it, see where we are, strong on the principles, see where we've got weak spots. Where we've got weak spots, perhaps we need to look at how we're doing this. What can we do to, create or improve that dimension on the principles? So it's a complex mess, really. When you've got a big complex system of work and a complex organization, you can't max all the principles out to 5. You're just not going to be able to. There's going to have to be a compromise. But what do you compromise versus what do you optimize? And so visualizing it, having the discussion, and then trying to make some changes. And we'll talk about how we might make the changes. So Helen, did you have any juicy questions yet?
Actually, literally a question has just come in the chat channel, but I haven't read it, so I'm just going to go wild. So the question is, how difficult is it to have people adopt or new hires to onboard to so many principles, even at a slow pace? Even though not all of them apply to every role, there seems like a lot of change in mindset to drive and maintain.
Yep, definitely agree. Would I stick somebody on a training course and go, here's all the principles and dump it into their brain? Probably not. So let's park that for the moment and look at how we use the principles and when we use them. Okay, and I think that the workshops that we're proposing and the way we're proposing it, they will learn them in a more sort of organic fashion in actually applying them, is the way I would put this. And I would also hope that a lot of the principles, when we look at them and go, yeah, but that's common sense, isn't it? And I think any principle that is too far away from common sense will be more difficult for people to learn. I think some of the principles, we found this, some of the principles we found have stood out. They're just really big, bold principles. Yep, we'll have that, we'll have that. If we're going to talk about it, we'll pick these. And so there are definitely some principles that are more important than others. And so if I was teaching somebody, I would probably just start with some of the key ones. And I would do it in context. I would pick up a particular situation and go, right, let's have a look at these principles. What does it look like from product ownership? And look at the ones that are relevant. I'll show you how we do that in a bit. Back very soon. So, admire this lovely scale scenario. Does that look familiar to anybody? What do we got in here? We've got some infrastructure teams building out the infrastructure, firewalls, networks, some cloud stuff nowadays, hopefully. And then we've got a core platform team or teams building out core components that are going to be reused, going to be surfaced through APIs, web teams and iOS teams and Android teams. I've only put 2 front-end teams on here, so I ran out of space. They're going to be consuming them, so they're going to be doing some core stuff, payment, whatever it happens to be, and then they're going to be consumed up here. Got the data platform people who are obviously all about data, and they go after our compliance, etc., moving data around and surfacing it in nice ways. And so we've got quite a lot going on. We've got architects out here to make sure that all of this is cohesive from an architectural point of view. We've got some UX people who are probably feeding into the backlog. They're creating wireframes, etc., to help these guys figure out what their interaction is going to look like. We've got business analysts creating lots of requirements and kicking them into the backlog to help out the product owner. And then we've got, lots of product owners who look after each of these teams. And then we have to decode what's in the main backlog, split it apart, and we have to figure out where those splits are. Maybe the architect helps with those, maybe the analyst's also helping with that. And then we feed off to these product owners who have their own backlogs. Okay, so I've got a database product or data product owner down here. Hopefully they know something about databases. Do they know about the customer? Yeah, you need to know about databases because you're the database product owner. And so this is a fairly classic way of organizations splitting this stuff out. I've seen this again and again and again. Anyone else seen this before? Just give me a thumbs up if you've seen this kind of picture. Yeah, okay, so it looks pretty normal, doesn't it? Okay, so what's wrong with this? Right, well, let's list up our principles. So we've got a principle out of the product area, structure around business synergies, where a composite value stream is too large to be supported by a single product owner. So we've reached that point where the product owner's brains exploding. Use business perspectives to inform splitting by independent and valuable subsets of the value stream. Right, well, let's have a look at our product owners here. Are we splitting by components of the value stream? No, we're not, especially down here. Do we have end-to-end value? Well, no, it all gets integrated back here. And we've got people feeding requirements and stuff in here. We probably haven't done as good a job as we could have here. You could argue that we're closest with our iOS development, our Android or web platforms, because they are kind of aligned around what customers are going to consume. But we're some distance away from it. Okay, so we're clearly not, if we were scoring this, are we 0 through to 5 on here? We might be maybe a 2 on there. Okay, so structure around natural interfaces. Where a composite value stream is too large to be supported by a single PO, consider breaking across natural interfaces where there is low technical coupling. I reckon we've done a pretty good job there. We've got good clean interfaces between the teams and so on. They all know what they're doing technically within their layer. We've got all the experts in there, reasonably clean. Maybe the architect has to help a little bit to make sure that we've got all the joins done correctly. But maybe we're scoring a 5 on that. But you can see that this is absolutely in contention with this principle. Okay, we'd like to structure this way, but actually this is doing well here and not so well on the other one. So we clearly haven't got a balance in there. Our output is only relevant in that it delivers outcomes and impacts. So this is about making sure that we reward and recognize valuable outcomes. We don't say that a team's great because they've got high velocity numbers, or they've done lots of releases this week, and they're ahead on their particular product backlog and roadmap. All right, we want to avoid unvalidatable output. All right, so if we actually have this output here, from this core team, how do we validate it? Is it going to be good? Is it going to work with the web, iOS, Android platforms? We don't know yet, not until it gets consumed. And avoid waste of overproduction. So the core platform team are building lots of really cool functionality. And what will probably happen is they'll build a lot, and then a whole bunch of it, because these guys will be running late, will not be consumed. They'll run late. We may also not have even capacity in these teams. Some teams might be over-resourced, over-peopled. Some may be under. Some may have too much work, some too little work. The ones with too little work will keep themselves busy. And we tend to see lots of waste coming out in here, and we've got lots of overproduction, which from a lean point of view, clearly isn't great. All right, so at these points here, we can't really say that we've got good, valuable, validatable outcomes. And we can only really recognize it when it's delivering its end-to-end value. Okay, so favor teams with broader solution accountability. And this is talking about both the life cycle, so from all the way from gathering the requirements, understanding what the customer is doing, all the way through to how we're operating it, what support issues, etc. we've got. So looking horizontally, if you will, across the life cycle. And then architecturally, teams should understand the whole context of what they're working on, act locally, but think globally. All right, so we've got a number of areas where this is going to fall foul. So our data platform team are busy creating lots of lovely stuff. They decide that they're going to move a bunch of data around, and they will locally optimize. And they'll go, you know what, I'm going to have this ETL function here, which is a big batch process. Go once a day. If it falls over, great, we can just pick it up and rerun it. Simple, lovely. Where people are going, yeah, we want real-time stock availability. Can we have it? No, we don't do that. So it's data platform people. It's too hard, can't do it. And so we've locally optimized here, and that's caused another team to be unable to deliver business value because we haven't got a lined up architectural look at the end-to-end value that we're after. So use definition of done as an enabling constraint. So if we think about the idea of definition done in a single team, if you read the Scrum Guide, it will talk about it's an important part of getting the team to collaborate. It's one of our enabling constraints. For this to be done, it has to have this, and this. Well, if it's an enabling constraint that helps a single team collaborate, it's also a potential for getting our teams of teams to actually collaborate properly. And so, of course, ideally what we would like is to actually share some of the definition of done, which will help them, check that their stuff works together, make sure that they've got common practices and standards that are actually going to allow things to mesh better. And it's also one of the kind of changes we can start putting in. If we've got a bunch of teams working fairly independently, doing their own stuff, one of the things we can do is start upping the definition of done to actually, over time, bring them forwards to more collaboration and working together so that they've got a common output. I would declare success in the end when we could actually abandon the integration system and test here by pulling all of this back into their processes. Maybe we can do things like lining up our sprints and so on and having shared sprint reviews, etc. So we're now starting to talk about example practices that we might build up to by looking and working this principle. All right, so an agile approach to change. So everyone familiar with the lovely David Snowden's Cynefin model? All right, so this is the latest with clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. I like the way he's gone for clear because it starts with a C. Well done. Love this model. And one of the things we have to acknowledge is that the systems of work with human beings in there and lots of unnecessary, in many cases, complexity in systems, and also the inherent complexity of the terrible, terribly hard problems we're trying to solve, all in the system, it's very complex. So we're living in the complex domain. If we're going to do anything in that complex domain and start changing it, we then need to understand that we're dealing with complexity and therefore it is not predictable. Can I bring along a super huge framework and ram it into my organization and hope for it to work? I'm going to enter the lottery and have more chance of winning. So instead, what we want is an emergent process where we are doing the probe, sense, respond. We're doing small change experiments, learning from them, wrapping them back in where they work, learning from them, changing to something else if it doesn't work. And so we're emerging practice over time. And so any change that we want to put in needs to be done bit by bit. Coming back to the question about sheep dipping somebody into all of the principles, I don't think we need to do that because we're going to actually be changing and looking at change incrementally. Also, when we look at change, we should do it as a group, not as individuals. So if I've got somebody new who doesn't know them, they're going to work with others who probably do. All right, so the scaling journey, this is a very simple slide. And as they say, all models are wrong, some are useful. There's a little bit of artistic license in here. Effectively, we want to start small. So if you're going to go scaling big, don't start with 17, start with 1. And what we want to do is learn from that team, build executable architecture, prove some of the key constraints out. What I would probably do at this point is abuse Scrum's guidelines for team size. And I've done this with a team of 22, where we have optimized and maximized learning and sacrificed speed. And we might do this for a while until we've got enough executable architecture that we've proven out, and then split the team. And we take some of that design thinking with them. We understand why we made certain architectural decisions. We've experimented around our UX, UI as well as part of this. And then we can take this apart and we take some of that goodness. And we've now got people in the teams who have worked together and understand why they decided to do things. And because we've started small, our speed of change and adaptation is much higher. Our speed of learning is much higher. The friction in the process is much smaller. So we start small, learn and improve. We then can see through our empirical data whether we actually need to scale or not. So many times I worked in organizations where they got 5, 6 teams and somebody said, you know what, I've just joined. And in my last company, we had 6 people in the team and we delivered more outcomes than these 5 teams are. So very often one small, really well-focused team can actually do the job. So do we really need to scale? Well, how do we know? Don't just start assuming you need to. Let's start small, see how fast we are, see what value we're delivering. Is there a rate of change that our customers and our business can take? And above that point, there's no point putting extra people on. All right, so all of this information will be available to us if we gain it empirically by starting small, experimenting and learning. Having decided that we are going to scale up, we want to do this in an evolutionary fashion. And so this is going to lead me into the next slide, which is talking about lean and agile change process. So I did think about building this slide. It was just too complicated, so I lost the will to live in doing animation. Apologies for that. One of these days I'll get around to it. All right, so there's a few bullets that I need to make sure I land first. This is collaborative change. This isn't the bosses sitting in a dark room, coming up with some ideas and going, you should all go and do these new things. This is about leadership supporting and being part of a facilitated learning process where we inspect and understand our current context, use the principles to help us identify where we're strong, where we're weak, look at some areas that we're weak, generate some options, maybe raiding patterns from other frameworks or from frameworks, etc., from good practices that we think about. Think about an experiment that we can then run on it that's safe to fail, i.e. small enough and is easy enough for us to actually implement. Have a hypothesis, say, well, if we do this, we think this will improve here. Right, let's try it, inspect and adapt. How long are we going to try the experiment? What are we expecting to see? We run it, we learn from it, need some adaptions, we cycle around a bit, right, we've got something that works. Hey, everybody else is clamoring, they want to do it as well. Then we can broaden it out. All right, we're in a new context now. Now where are we weak? What do we change next? And so we can do this incremental change process. And coming back to the training aspect on the principles, this is where we bring groups together and we bring out the principles. We just inspect our current context and understand it through the view of the principles. So if anyone's interested, there's Lean Agile Change, where a lot of that kind of thinking comes from. Right, changing people's behaviors is really hard. Okay, and a big change, even harder. So if we have a current behavioral process, we've identified an option to change. How do we move the needle from here to here? Here's our future behavior or process change that we'd like to see. Well, the trouble is pushing back against this is all the ingrained habits, the fear of change. Yeah, as human beings, you know, we have cultural stability because this is the way we've always done things. Absolutely is the default over something new and scary. So we have a fear of change inherently built into us. If it's a big change, it's going to be even scarier. Yeah, the risk of the change, this could go wrong, the wheels could fall off, we're all going to look bad. And so, you know, we don't want to do it. And it's just really difficult. There's new skills, you know, I can't do this. And so we need to make sure we're fighting this. How do we get ingrained habits and actually get people to do something new? We need some prompt, some trigger. Otherwise, we'll just carry on. So let's look at our current processes. Where can we wire in a prompt or a trigger? Can I change a policy on a Kanban board? Can I put a little question that we seed, I don't know, when teams are coming up with a sprint goal, that go, oh, we've got this question, acts as a trigger. If we frame things as an experiment, let's just try this. It's not a big scary change. We're just going to try this. If it doesn't work, we won't accept it. Yeah, it's an experiment. If it fails, hey, we learned something. And this is where leadership support, setting up a psychologically safe environment, framing the experiment as learning, as opposed to we're going to create loads of lovely goodies for the customer. This is about learning. This is about testing our assumptions. This is about reducing our risk. Yeah, these are the things we'd like to learn from it. If we've got a big change, what can we do that's micro step that reduces it? Can I go thinner and shorter on it? Can I just get a little baby step? Can I just do it with less people, less teams? How do I make it small? Have we got the motivation to do it? Does everyone understand why it's so important? Can they see the end-to-end value on it? And just make sure that we've got really good clarity on why we do, what the benefits are. And then, of course, if we have something new, we haven't played with that technology or that process, etc. before, how can we increase the capability of our teams, their understanding? Do we need to teach them stuff on there? And again, if I reduce the size of something, can I reduce the friction for actually doing this? All right, so there's a great model, the FOG model of change that I definitely would recommend, Tiny Habits, really good stuff. I would have a look at that. And this is borrowing heavily from there and a few other places. All right, so just to realize we're running through this, I, as always, squeeze way too much into an hour presentation. I actually thought it was an hour and 15 minutes. So, of course, we had the mingle first. Apologies for that. Content mapping workshop. So this is a workshop that has been run how many times, Matt? 5, 6 times?
Yeah, about 5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 or 6. We learn every time we do it, I think. But it's been tested with multiple organisations and groups and so on. So this is, I think, Jan and Matt were the key people responsible for coming up with this. Pierluigi's art. Those of you who do this kind of type of art will realise the shadows on the wrong side. So we're going to have to correct all the shadows because people are going to complain about that, not the principles. All right, so when we're mapping the context, let's understand our teams. Who are all the teams? And we need to think about internal, external teams. Are we reliant on some partners, other teams that can produce APIs that we can consume, etc.? So let's look at our team landscape and understand that. All right, and then what work do they do? What's the output for that work? We've got a kind of dotted line going on here because this is a kind of like an interim output. It's an interim piece of value which probably needs to be put together with something else before it becomes actual outcome worthy value. And so we can detail what kind of work it is, etc. We can look at the product and product owners and identify where the actual deliverable end-to-end products are, where we've got our product owners. It says where you have them here. Very often we find organizations that are scaled and they don't even have product owners in there. So they're just putting specs together and building them. All right, then we can look at the actual flow. So how do the teams interact? Where do their outputs come together? So we were talking about composite value streams earlier. We're starting to kind of build up a picture of our value stream. Put in all our stakeholders, again, internal, external, regulatory, compliance. People are going to feed in requirements. People are going to consume it. And so we need to do a proper job here. This is, of course, just a few little examples in here. We've built up a much bigger stakeholder map. And then using the principles to identify improvements and areas for change. So I've just got the 3 different categories of principles and just a few examples of where they might apply to this particular example here. And so in the workshops, we try and use the principles and go, right, where do we fall short on these principles? And then we just annotate the map and figure out where we've got opportunities to help. Of course, once we've got all the opportunities, we're going to look at the relative effort and cost to trying to carry out one of these options versus the value that we can see in there. And we just move them around to gain some sort of prioritization. And then, of course, we can generate our experiments, prioritize those, run parallel experiments where they are safe and don't aren't independent, so that this experiment might interfere with another experiment. So we make sure that we don't run too many experiments in the same area at the same time. We can only deal with so much learning. If you're lucky enough to be in a physical world, so a number of the workshops were face-to-face, same sort of stuff was all artfully created. Matt, I think you did quite a lot of cutting out.
Yeah, I think, can I just add to this? I think this workshop is the way that you can expose the principles to your context. And so what we're doing here is mapping your context with these characters. So you get an overlay of your context. And then we take some core principles like end-to-end products, a key one, just to try and highlight where you might need to change based on the principles. So it's a really good way to start as an access point to the principles, because otherwise it could get a bit overwhelming. We don't need to use all of them. A key 4 or 5 is enough to start thinking about where you might want to change.
Which I think also starts to talk to the learning curve on the principles. And I think one of the things we will probably need to do on the principles is kind of highlight or star some of our key principles, or have a concept of core principles to reduce the set to start with before people then can expand out. Right, QA and wrap. I know it was quick. And normally my presentations and workshops are all interactive, so it felt a bit weird just talking at you. So we managed to squeeze in a lot of time, but a lot in the time. QA and wrap, hand us your questions. What questions do we have out there?
First of all, let's give our speaker a round of applause.
Thank you. Very quiet applause, I have to say.
It's the virtual way.
It's the thought that counts, though.
So Matt has actually been doing a good job of answering some of the questions in the chat channel. I just sat back and relaxed. But what questions have we got for Colin and Matt? Anything at all? You can either pop it in the chat channel or you can pop your hand up, just like Jagmeet. What question have you got, Jag?
My thinking is that why is everyone still thinking of scaled agile or scaling up agile? Why it's not making micro agile the framework, which is with ChatGPT coming in, with a lot of experimentations becoming a lot cheaper in nature. A lot of people can now collaborate, all the walls coming down between the role of product owner versus the role of a consumer who is directly consuming the product, and the experiment they can do with technology becoming faster and faster. Why not micro agile is a way to go forward? Why still scaled agile or some sort of scaling with agile is a way to go forward?
So just to clarify, what are we meaning by micro agile? It sounds lovely.
Okay. So my thing is that users are still sitting somewhere else while the product creation is going on, while the consumption will happen at the service, when there's a service. Like you only said, when you talk to finance, when you talk to operations, when you talk to somebody, they understand services. They don't understand the product. Product is a very concept which is technology oriented, at least in the technology world of things. So so the idea that you can look from product to service now, with the advent of a lot of collaboration tools that are coming through, one of that is ChatGPT or large language models. Is there a way where rather than saying we need 5 developers, now you need 1 developer, 1 production or 1 service owner, which is on operation side, 1 service owner, which is on marketing side, to produce an end-to-end delivery for a service?
It sounds like a kind of like an entrepreneurial thing where lots of people are creating kind of micro value. And I think there's probably like a network effect you could do in some organizations, in some, particularly the way they're set up and so on, and their traditional and their history, I guess, it's difficult. I think some of the more complex composite products would struggle with that model. But again, why can't we get closer to it? All right, good stuff. Who's next?
Brad, over to you. And then after that, we've got a question in the chat.
Thank you so much. To go from Jagmeet's comment, I had asked earlier, but I was in and out. And great stuff, Colin. I haven't been exposed, only through kind of the meanderings of SAFe. I had asked in the chat earlier if you actually do have a white paper that's put kindly of backing out of SAFe, because there are many organizations, and I do have many peers and mentors that I look at that say their experience with SAFe is basically backing organizations out of SAFe. Do you have a white paper or anything, recommendations? Because it is a reality. They've done a great job of marketing it. The PMI probably really absorbed it early on, but it's really, it's everything that you say. Do you have anything documented on backing out of SAFe, in some degree? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think there's probably two possible answers here. One, there's a whole bunch of writing papers, references to where SAFe has failed. So just to stop people falling into that trap again, and just getting the whole thing. I think our overall approach, and so when we publish all this stuff in this summer, our overall approach is, rather than backing out, so to speak, is picking up the organization from wherever it is now. So if it's got a failed implementation of a framework, then you're going to need to incrementally move away from wherever you are now, rather than just throwing it all out the door and doing a massive transaction. One of the things we'll find is that in any given context, there's all the formal published processes, rules, etc. Then there's all the informal stuff that actually makes things work. So you need to be very careful. If you just rip stuff out, you'll actually, it's a bit like ripping something out of a human, you'll do more damage. So our advice would be, understand the current context where it doesn't work. So I've been working on a failed SAFe implementation. I haven't ripped out the program increments. I've just changed them, evolved them, we're using it as a joint road mapping process now to bring the product owners together to get a joint discussion about our interdependencies and so on. We're using the big room planning to get people collaborating, talking. And then we have just enough planning there. So we've reduced it right down, reduced its time, reduced its overhead, reduced the expectations and predictability from it. So what we've done is we've evolved what was a failed thing, and we're making it better. And actually, if you speak to someone like Dean Leffenwheel, he'll probably say, boy, that's what you should be doing with SAFe. Yeah, so it's, rather than backing out, I would say evolve forward. All right, thanks, Brad.
So before we come to you, Mike, I've just got a question from Louise in the chat channel. Have you ever seen scaling driven by what's in a tool like Jira, Align, or whatever? As in, the tool is structured like this, so that's how we'll structure our teams too.
Yes. So I've seen it again and again, but obviously the tools come out of the box in a default way, and then people change them. Sometimes the requests, people like us get to change them. We want an extra process in here to make sure that as a tester, I can mark this as failed testing and I've reverted it back to the developer. Why do you want that? To show that I'm doing my work. Those sorts of things go into a system, and then that is the way people work. We can engineer this though. If we know this, changing the processes, changing the states, the boards, etc., and the way the tools are set up will help us change the behaviors of our organization. But the answer is yes. People do default and they're passive and they work within the tool. Well, Jira says this, Jira does that, or they've set it up this way. We're going to have an initiative or whatever this thing is here, a capability, and it has these rules and this is what we do. And then, of course, they lock it down, and only so many people can change Jira, so they actually make it a high cost of change. Therefore, it's actually easier just to use this thing. So we need to make sure that we understand that tools do influence our behaviors greatly, so we engineer them and need the freedom to evolve and change them to help us change the behaviors. But also, always remember, people over process. Yeah, the tools are not that important. They're only there to help us collaborate and talk to each other and have that creativity. So don't get lost in the tools. How long are we spending in the tools? So refinement meeting, product owner, just talking, droning on, reading out what's on the screen, from the user story in Jira. That's not a collaborative meeting. Throw Jira away from the meeting, get to Mural or Miro, extract all the stuff onto a board, have our goals and so on there, move things around, identify what we want to do, and then push stuff back into Jira after the meeting. So make sure that we are using tools and the right tools sensibly and don't get trapped in them. That was a bit of a rant. Sorry about that.
Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, the old processes and tools over individuals and interactions. I like it. So Colin, thank you very much. Intriguing and somewhat provocative. So I've got 1,000 questions. I'll try and limit them.
Helen?
What are you doing next Christmas? I mean, the obvious question to start with, if I do have a lot to say, is how do we interact with you guys on this? How do we find what you guys have? You said something about publishing something in the summer, which is great. White papers, have you trialed this? How do we get copies of these slides? Anything like that would be great.
Okay, the slides are easy. We'll PDF up slides and make those available to the audience. So that bit's easy. We will be publishing it. So at the moment, it's on a MediaWiki, ScaleAgility.org, I think, Matt, if I remember rightly. It will be, by default, it will be there. We will be publishing it. We'll be going out on LinkedIn, etc. We will also, I suspect, want feedback about this. Clearly, we've been, as you can see from some of the workshop stuff, we have been, trialing it and working with people to see if the ideas land, whether it helps them think about the scaling situation. Feedback we have is very good, and they just said they completely change their perspective on how they're scaling. Sometimes it's been very timely, and they've stopped doing the big implementation of the framework and so on. Clearly, it's also something that we'll evolve and learn from. So I think, in the end, it looks and feels like common sense, and we just need to accumulate more of that sense, figure out. And so the question earlier about how do we land these principles with people who are new to them and so on, we will obviously be doing quite a lot of learning about how best to land the ideas. We've already got some ideas about it. And so, yeah, we'll be practicing, making it available, and we'll be wanting to have good feedback and input from people out in the field.
Could I suggest and encourage you to hand the link possibly across to Helen, or possibly yourself, publish that link to Wiki in the chat for this meetup, just so we can have something that works after this meeting is finished?
Yeah, it works, but you won't be able to see anything because it's currently it's a building site at the moment. So we're on MVP territory. We're as I said, refactoring stuff that's in there, and we will publish it. I mean, we can send a link, but it won't be
possibly active. Even if I could make another suggestion, email sign up to let us know when it is live. That would certainly be helpful. Yeah, it's a good idea. The other thing I was going to...
So on that, if you are interested in being kept up to date, because of GDPR, private message me in the chat channel now, or your emails, and I'll add you to the list to make sure that that thing happens, okay?
Thanks, Andy.
Sorry, just the other thing I was quite curious about, there's two other things, I'll try and be quick. You talked about workshops. So are you doing more than just workshops? Certainly when I first adopted Agile, we had ThoughtWorks well, we had a RUP implementation from IBM, and then almost directly after that, we scrapped that, and we had ThoughtWorks come in and put bums on seats next to us and actually shadowed us through an implementation. And I found that to be better than workshops by itself. Are you guys trying to do something like that?
Yeah, so we'll be going out and helping people, and the idea of making all this public is that we can kind of grow a bit of a community of coaches and consultants who can go out there and help organizations make better choices and, you know, evolution rather than revolution.
Yes.
So the answer is yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if you look at just picking on leadership, I mean, I do a lot of work with leadership about setting up the environment and them supporting these kinds of things. And so, yeah, we're very much hands-on. All of us are all very practical. We're all active coaches. So this is where all this comes from, all the scars from actually doing this. And we're finding that the works, we've been working on this for a couple of years now, is already helpful for us. The language, the approach, the way of explaining, etc., has been massively helpful when we're working with our clients.
And then last question for you. One of the biggest things I personally believe in is devolving authority downwards. So having teams have autonomy on their own work, their own environment, their own tools, etc. One of the biggest problems with SAFe is you often get a top-down mandate.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about, like the one slide that you had about coalescing definitions of done into some uniform set plus some proprietary additions per team, so a core plus your own stuff that you need for your team, I would still worry that you might start getting some tension between that devolution of authority, that bottom-up approach, and the need for top-down. Are you worried about that at all?
Worried's probably the wrong word. I know that it's a challenge. So one of the things that I always work with, so I've got another slide. Let me just very quickly see if I can find it. So I'm not worried about it, but I do see, whoops, that shouldn't come out of there. I do see this problem coming up again and again and again. And the whole empowerment, empowering a team, if it's a single team, getting the team to be autonomous and empowered is hard. But to do it at scale, so much harder. And as soon as you've got that, there's the excuse with the jackboots come in, you will all do this, and it gets pushed down. So it has to be from a much more bottom-up sort of process. So Matt, do you want to talk for a moment, or are you doing something else? I was just going to dig out a slide from another.
I think you partially solved that problem by, rather than mandating implementation, you rather encourage principles, and then implementation can be an emergent thing. That somewhat solves the issue. I'm not sure that
it does, but some of it also comes down to education of leadership, and I basically call it Agile control services. And I'm just looking for the slide here. Here we go. So this is not obviously in the deck that we're working on at the moment. All right, so this is all about maximizing team autonomy. And so part of this, so I had that architect sitting, out there, ivory tower, creating stuff. So instead, what this is about enabling constraints, and we call this bounded autonomy. And this is where you've got the control surfaces. So definition of done is absolutely part of this. So you can see that a bunch of teams get together and we have a workshop on our joint definition of done. And there may be very, very specific definition done because we're working on, this encoder over here. The definition done has nothing to do with this one over here, but there's some shared stuff that we do agree on. We evolve that and we agree that's the boundary. We may have some platform choices, some enterprise architecture standards. They're standards. And we can't unilaterally decide to go somewhere different, but we can absolutely challenge them. We would like to bring along AI and implement it here. We haven't got an AI standard. We'd like to try this. Maybe they become the pathfinder. And then if it's successful as an experiment, it gets absorbed into enterprise standards. So the enterprise standards themselves, creating these kind of boundaries, are evolutionary themselves and absolutely open to question. But there's, for autonomy, you need clarity around what we can decide and what we can't decide. And a lot of places, that mystery about, well, can we decide this? The default assumption is no, we need permission. But if we're really clear about what we as a single team can decide, what is our team of teams space, what is our enterprise space, these sorts of agreement can be very helpful. It also then, when you explain that to leadership, they go, oh, right, so Agile isn't just chaos. We can actually set some constraints and so on, but we need to do it with conversation and collaboration, and we need to go where the knowledge is. We actually need to empower at the knowledge and the data, and then we can ask the right questions, and then we can help support those decisions.
Yeah, because I think you're going to find there's going to be one other tension. I'm sure you're aware of this, but AI means that you're going to start having rapid delivery, rapid feedback, and you need that to become competitive. But rapid feedback and rapid delivery is almost oxymoronic in a scaled environment where you need to collaborate across an organization to gain consensus. So I think there's going to be a tension there that will eventually need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, AI is an interesting thing, but in the end, it is a tool. It can be used astonishingly badly if one doesn't understand it. It can also be used badly to create a mess really, really fast that then takes ages to actually bring back together. So if you had all the teams individually generating code with AI, you know that it would look really great for the first month or so, if it lasted that long. And at which point they've realized they've got millions and millions of lines of code that don't all, not cohesive, they can't debug it, it takes ages to actually build and do anything, and every time they touch it, it falls apart. So you can see that AI can be used really, really successfully to look at a complex piece of code, and it might give us insights into it. Yeah, but actually generating all your code with AI, you're going to be daft.
So I'm just going to put a pin in there, Mike, your question hog. And Paul Baldover has had his hand up for so long, so I think let's hand over to Baldover and give him a chance.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I work for a large European bank. Don't laugh.
I hope it's not one that I've worked with as well.
Well, it's German anyway. And a few years ago, like all banks, decided that they were being left behind, wanted to go agile. So you talked about a failed framework, and what I'm dealing with is we have the Spotify model with clusters and cells. There's Scrum and Kanban teams. We have PI planning, which was nicked from SAFe. We have OKRs that generate key results that teams are measured on. And oh, by the way, you can't put in an OKR that fails, because the cluster lead says, why did that fail? Next time, put in objectives that always pass. It's broken in lots of ways. So in that sort of circumstance, where it's not one framework but lots of broken frameworks, and a lot of it is tick box exercise So we have objectives that are met on the day that they're put in. We have PI planning that essentially we are just paying lip service to. Cluster leads and cell leads and chapter leads are, line managers, for want of another word. Where would you start with a mess like that?
I would start with the people. So I don't think your problem is all of the bits of framework you've put in. I think by the sounds of it, and obviously I'm going off very, very little context, but you painted quite a graphic picture. I would say that your organization is suffering from a complete lack of psychological safety. So if we think about psychological safety, it needs, psychological safety gives us the ability to say, right, this doesn't look right. I think there's a problem with this. I think we should do this. It gives them the opportunity to fail. We tried that, didn't work. That's fine. Right, what did we learn from it? Move on. And so you haven't got the ability to fail, which means that as soon as you haven't got the ability to fail in a complex system and a complex space, then people are going to make stuff up, pay lip service, tick boxes, etc. Just do what they're told. And so I would start with the people. What we'll always find is that people will work around dumb processes. If they can collaborate, work together, smart people will sort it out. If you've got smart processes in quotes and dumb people who don't talk to each other, nothing good is going to happen. Okay, if we can't experiment and learn, we won't move forwards. Part of learning, well, the important part of learning is trying stuff and finding it doesn't work and learning from it. If we can't do that with both our technical skills and what we're trying to do, our planning, processes, etc., and also the services that we're trying to build in a complex space, if we can't fail, we're not going to learn. And so we need to have that psychological safety in there. So I would probably, as I say, start with the people, and then when we can get the safety and particularly leadership in there to change their behaviors, their actions, their language, and set the safety to actually go, yeah, you know what, there's a lot of stuff that's broken here, get the honesty out. Now we can start an evolutionary process to move forwards. But I wouldn't start that evolutionary process until I had the safety to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.